They said, "Dad, just stay here for 2 weeks. We'll come back once we're settled in." I nodded. That was 11 months ago. They never came back. I should have known when my son carried only one bag inside for me. One bag. For a 2-week stay. I'd packed 3, thinking we were getting the new house ready together, thinking I was part of the move. He left 2 bags in the trunk without a word, told me the place was clean, had good meals, cable television, and people my age to talk to. He said it like he was describing a vacation. Then, he hugged me the way you hug someone you're not planning to see again soon. One arm, brief, already pulling away before it was over. The facility was called Meadow Glen. It was fine. Clean floors, staff who smiled on schedule, a common room where the television was always on too loud. I sat in the room they assigned me, room 14, first floor. Smelled like pine cleaner and something beneath it I couldn't name, and I waited. I called my son the first day. He answered. Said they were still unloading boxes, that the new house was a mess, that I should enjoy the peace and quiet, that he'd call me Sunday. He didn't call Sunday. The second week I called twice. My daughter-in-law answered the second time, her voice warm in that practiced way, like a recording. She said they were overwhelmed. The kids were adjusting to new schools. My son was under pressure at work. She said I should give it a little more time. I asked when they were coming to get me. She paused just long enough that I heard it, the space where an honest answer would have been, and then she said, "Soon, Dad. Just hang tight." I hung tight for 5 more weeks. I want to be fair. I am not a dramatic man. I spent 38 years as a high school history teacher. I graded papers with a red pen. I coached junior varsity baseball for 16 seasons. I buried my wife, Margaret, 4 years ago, and I did not fall apart. I kept the house clean. I kept my doctor appointments. I cooked real meals and took my medications without being reminded. I was not a burden. I was careful never to be. But somewhere in those 5 weeks at Meadow Glen, sitting in that common room listening to game shows I didn't care about, eating dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon with men who couldn't remember my name from one day to the next, I began to understand what had happened. This wasn't temporary. This was the plan. What I did next, I credit entirely to Margaret. She used to say, "When something is wrong, don't talk yourself out of knowing it." She said it about students who were struggling, about colleagues who were lying, about our own son when he was 17 and getting into trouble he thought we didn't see. She was right every time. I had known something was wrong from the moment my son carried only one bag inside. I had just been polite enough to pretend I didn't. I had my wallet. I had my phone. I had the small envelope of cash I kept in my inside coat pocket since the year I turned 55. Something Margaret and I started after her father was caught without cash during a medical scare and spent 3 days. Stranded. A habit. $800 in 50s, folded neatly. Always there. I had my Medicare card, my ID, and a debit card connected to the account my son did not know existed, the one I'd been quietly adding to since the year he got married and started making decisions for me I hadn't asked him to make. I called a cab on a Tuesday morning in November. I tipped the driver well and asked him to take me to the Greyhound station downtown. I did not tell anyone at Meadow Glen I was leaving. I left my key on the nightstand. I took my one bag and my coat, and I walked out the front door while the staff was occupied with breakfast cleanup, and a man named Gerald was loudly disputing the rules of Pinnacle in the corner. On the bus, I had 4 hours to think. I chose Portland because my college roommate, Frank, had mentioned it every year for 30 years, and I had never gone. Frank had passed away in 2019, but I figured if he was that passionate about a city for 3 decades, it owed me a look. I watched the highway roll past the window. My hands were steady. My chest was something I couldn't name. Not grief exactly. Not anger exactly. Something more like the feeling you get when you've been holding a heavy box for a long time and you finally set it down. I landed in Portland on a gray afternoon with wet streets and air that smelled like rain and cedar. I found a motel near the bus station, nothing fancy. $38 a night. A room with a window that faced a parking lot and a heater that clicked when it ran. I washed my face, sat on the bed, and let myself sit with what I'd done. No one called that night. I didn't expect them to. In the morning, I bought coffee at a diner 2 blocks over and read the local paper front to back. Something I hadn't done in years because my son had decided I got my news from the television now, as though that were already decided. The woman behind the counter, maybe 60 herself, refilled my cup without asking. That small thing being seen without having to ask felt enormous. I spent the next 3 days walking. My knee had been complaining since summer, but it cooperated. I walked neighborhoods I didn't know, read the boards outside coffee shops and laundromats, ate cheap and well. On the third day, I found a corkboard at a hardware store with handwritten index cards pinned to it. Room for rent, older building, quiet block, private entrance, shared laundry, fair price. Call Walt. I called Walt. He answered on the second ring, direct and unhurried. Asked how old I was. I told him 67. He asked if I smoked. I said no. He asked if I was running from something or running towards something. I thought about that for a moment. Both, I said. He gave a short laugh. Sounds about right. Come by at 2. Walt's house was a 2-story craftsman on a quiet street with a maple tree in the front yard losing its last leaves. He was 74, retired electrician, widower of 3 years. He had the kind of handshake that meant something, and the kind of eyes that had already decided about you before you said much. He showed me the room, small, clean, a window that caught afternoon light, a desk I immediately liked, $40 a week for the first month. Then we'd talk. First week cash. I gave him 2 weeks up front. That night, Walt made chili, and we ate at a kitchen table that had seen 20 years of dinners. He didn't ask why I was in Portland, or where I'd come from. He talked about the electrical code changes that had made his last years on the job complicated, about the maple tree out front, which had been planted by his wife the year they moved in, about a neighbor named Collins, who had strong opinions about leaf blowers. I did not think once about Meadow Glen, or my son, or the room where I'd left a key on a nightstand. I slept well. First time in months. The following Monday, I walked into a hardware store 4 blocks from Walt's and asked if they needed anyone part-time. The owner, a man about my age named Bev, short for Beverly, he said, dead serious, don't make a thing of it, looked me over and asked what I knew. I told him I'd taught for nearly 4 decades, coached baseball, owned a home and fixed everything in it myself for 30 years. He asked if I could work mornings. I said yes. He said 8 to noon. 5 days. Cash at the end of the week. See how it went. I started the next day. The work was simple. Helping customers find what they needed. Stocking shelves. The occasional small repair consultation when someone came in confused about a pipe fitting or a circuit breaker. I liked it. I liked the smell of the store. The specific weight of tools in my hands. The way people relaxed when you gave them a straight answer. Bev didn't talk much, but he was fair and he noticed when you did things right. By the end of the second week, he'd given me a key. Walt and I fell into an easy rhythm. Coffee in the morning before I left for work. Evenings he watched baseball or worked on a model he was building, a 1942 Curtis P-40. Warhawk. Meticulous. Took months. I read or did crosswords at the kitchen table. We talked when we felt like it, and didn't when we didn't. I had not lived that easily with another person since Margaret. I turned my phone on for the first time after 3 weeks. 41 missed calls, 19 voicemails. My son's voice on the first message was surprised, almost offended, as if I'd pulled a prank. Dad, the facility says you left. Call me. By the 5th message, it had curdled into something tighter. This is not okay. You can't just disappear. Call me back immediately. My daughter-in-law left 2 messages, both with that same recording warmth, both explaining that they were worried and had notified the authorities and weren't angry, just concerned. The authorities. I almost laughed. I was a 67-year-old man with a Medicare card and a clean driving record. I had committed no crime. I had simply left a facility I was not legally required to stay in, without asking anyone's permission, which is something adults are allowed to do. There was one message that was different. My grandson, Tyler. He was 22, working at an auto shop in the city. The kind of kid who never said much, but always meant what he said. His message was short. Grandpa, just let me know you're okay. That's all. His voice was quiet and steady. I listened to it twice. I saved his number. I did not call back yet. The weeks moved with a pace I had forgotten existed. Mornings at the hardware store, afternoons walking, reading, helping Walt with the Warhawk when he let me hold pieces. I started cooking dinner 2 nights a week, nothing elaborate, the kind of food Margaret would have recognized, pot roast and soup, and a chicken dish with lemon and thyme that Walt declared the best thing he'd eaten since 2021. At the store, a regular named Douglas started coming in Tuesdays and Thursdays. Former contractor, bad hip, spending his retirement on projects he'd deferred for years. We argued about the right way to seal a concrete floor, and whether oak or maple made a better workbench surface, and whether modern cordless drills had actually improved or just gotten more expensive. He brought in coffee sometimes. I started expecting him. One evening, Walt set down the P-40 wing he'd been sanding and said, without preamble, "They put you somewhere, didn't they? And you left." It wasn't a question. I said, "Yes." He nodded slowly, went back to sanding. After a while, he said, "My daughter tried that with me last spring. I told her if she pulled that again, I'd change my will before she could blink." He said it the way you state a fact. I appreciated that about Walt. No dramatics, just the thing itself. The letter from my son arrived on a Thursday. Walt left it on the kitchen table without comment. The handwriting was my son's careful, architectural, the way he'd written since middle school. Inside, 6 pages. He did not begin with hello or how are you. He began with, "Dad, what you've done has put this entire family under enormous stress." I read all 6 pages standing at the kitchen counter. He cataloged the calls to the facility, the calls to local hospitals, the time he'd taken off work, the explanation he'd had to give the children, the distress my disappearance had caused my daughter-in-law, who had not been sleeping well. He described the situation as irresponsible and selfish. He wrote that he understood I might have feelings about the transition. He used that word, transition, but that what I had done was not the way to handle it. He said he and my daughter-in-law were willing to discuss the situation, but only if I was prepared to be realistic about what independence actually looks like at your age. At your age. As if 67 were a terminal condition. He did not mention the 2 weeks that became 7. He did not mention the single bag. He did not mention the Sunday he'd promised to call and hadn't. I folded the letter, set it back in the envelope, and placed it in the drawer beneath the dish towels. Walt came into the kitchen and saw my face. "Bad?" he said. "Standard," I said. He put the kettle on. Tyler called the next morning. I let it ring twice, then answered, "Grandpa." His voice settled something in my chest that had been sitting crooked. "I'm here," I said, a long breath on his end. "You okay?" "Better than I've been in a while, actually." He laughed, a real laugh, surprised. "Where are you?" "Somewhere I chose," I said. "Somewhere quiet." He didn't press. He told me about the shop, a carburetor he'd spent 3 days rebuilding, a coworker named Marcus who was teaching him to play chess. He sounded good. He sounded like himself. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing urgent and everything that mattered. Before we hung up, he said, "Dad and Lisa are working with a lawyer." A pause. "Something about your accounts. I don't know the details. I just wanted you to know." I thanked him and sat with that information for a moment after we hung up. Then I called the number for an attorney I'd found in the local directory 2 weeks prior, a woman named Carol Pratt, whose office was 6 blocks from Walt's house. I'd looked her up the day after I arrived in Portland, the same way I'd looked up the motel and the bus schedule, not because I expected to need her, but because Margaret had always said, "Know your options before you need them." I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. Carol Pratt was 61, direct, and wore reading glasses she was always either putting on or taking off. She listened to the full situation without interrupting. When I finished, she asked a few questions about the account my son didn't know about the account he did know about the house back in Wilmington, which was in my name alone, paid off, worth something substantial in the current market. She asked if I'd considered updating my will. I had been considering it, I told her, since about the 2nd week at Meadow Glen. We worked for 2 hours. By the end of it, Tyler was my primary beneficiary. My son received a specific bequest, not nothing. I am not vindictive, but the house and the bulk of the estate now went elsewhere. Carol filed the paperwork that afternoon. She also sent a letter on my behalf to my son's attorney. I was of sound mind, under no duress, living voluntarily in a residence of my own choosing, and any further attempts to characterize my departure as a medical or legal matter would be addressed accordingly. I walked home in the sharp November air, feeling lighter than I had in years. Douglas was at the store when I got in the next morning. He'd brought 2 coffees and a problem with a bathroom tile project that had taken an unexpected turn. We spent an hour at the counter going over it. Bev wandered over eventually and contributed an opinion about adhesive that started an argument. Douglas and I both lost. It was a good morning. My son came in person on a Saturday. I was stocking the back shelves when Bev came to find me. Man out front asking for you, dressed like he's going to a meeting. He was standing near the entrance, my son. He looked older than I, remembered thinner in the face, something pressed about his expression that hadn't been there before, or that I hadn't noticed. He saw me and started toward me, then stopped when I didn't move to meet him halfway. Dad. His voice was careful. Hello, I said. He looked around the store. You're working here. I am. A long pause. We need to talk. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the Sunday phone call that never came, the bag left in the trunk, the 6-page letter that never once said, I'm sorry. We can talk, I said, but I want you to understand something before you say whatever you came to say. I kept my voice level, the way I'd learned to keep it in 38 years of classrooms. I left because I chose to, not because I was confused or frightened or having an episode, because I understood exactly what was happening, and I decided I deserved better than it. He opened his mouth, closed it. I said, you left me in that place because it was easier than figuring out how to include me in your life. That's the truth. You don't have to say it out loud, but I need you to know I know it. His jaw tightened. That's not. We were overwhelmed. The move, the kids, the 7 weeks, I said. You said 2. It was 7. And you didn't call. The store was quiet around us. Bev had found something to do on the other side of the building with great diplomacy. My son looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked back up, there was something different in his face, not an apology exactly, but the face a man makes when he's run out of arguments and has to decide what he is. The kids miss you, he said finally. Tyler found me, I said. I know the kids miss me. I miss them too. What do you want me to do? He asked. It came out genuine, which surprised me. Right now? Nothing, I said. I need you to go home and think about what kind of relationship you want to have with your father. Not what's convenient. Not what makes your life easier. What's actually true. I paused. When you've figured that out, you can call me. And not through a lawyer. He stood there another moment. Then he nodded once, stiff but real, and left. I went back to the shelves. My hands were steady. That evening, Walt and I sat on the back porch with the last of a bottle of something decent he'd been saving. The maple out front had dropped everything now. The yard smelled like cold ground and dead leaves, and the specific cleanness of a November night in the Pacific Northwest. How'd it go? He asked. I think he heard some of it, I said. That's something. We sat with that. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and stopped. Walt refilled both glasses. You know what I thought the first time you showed up on my porch? What? I thought. This man is done being managed. He looked out at the yard. Takes some people their whole lives to get there. I didn't say anything. He was right, and we both knew it. Tyler drove up from the city the following weekend. I met him at a diner near the hardware store. His idea, he looked up good breakfast places beforehand, showed up with the list on his phone. He was bigger than I remembered, or maybe just more himself. He had his grandmother's eyes, the direct kind that didn't waste movement. We ordered eggs and coffee, and he told me he'd gotten his hands on a '68 Mustang project he was slowly taking apart and putting back together in the shop's bay. He described it the way I used to describe lesson plans that excited me, The particulars, the problems, the specific pleasure of a thing being done right. I listened the way I hadn't listened to anyone in years, without waiting for my turn or managing the conversation. When we'd finished eating, he said, "Grandpa, I want to understand what happened. The real version," I told him. All of it, the bag, the Sunday that didn't come, the weeks of being reassured and delayed, the moment I understood what the plan actually was, the cab to the bus station. I told him about the letter his father sent, and what it said and what it didn't say. I told him about Carol Pratt and what I'd decided. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a while, looking at his coffee. "Dad's going to lose his mind when he finds out about the will," he said. "Probably. Is that why you did it?" I shook my high head. "I did it because your grandmother told me for 50 years to stop giving my power away, and she was right, and it took me too long to listen." I paused. "The will is just practical. It reflects what's actually true. You showed up." He didn't. Tyler nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket and set something on the table between us, a small photograph, old, worn at the edges. The two of us at his Little League game, me in the third base coach's box, him at the plate, both of us in the split second after a hit, his face lit up in a way that 12-year-old faces only get a few times. I remembered the day. I remembered exactly what pitch it was. "Found this cleaning out the garage," he said. "Figured you should have it." I looked at it for a long moment. Then I picked it up and put it in my coat pocket. "We split the check," he insisted. I let him. The weeks after that had a different texture. Not quieter exactly, the hardware store was busy through the holidays. Douglas came in nearly every day. Walt's daughter visited for Thanksgiving and turned out to be nothing like he'd described, in the best way but more settled. Like a house after the furniture's finally placed. I cooked Thanksgiving dinner. Walt's daughter, a woman named Renee who taught middle school science and had her father's same directness, arrived with wine and a pie and an opinion about the best way to brine a turkey that was completely wrong. I said so. She laughed, which meant she was fine. We ate at the big kitchen table, and I didn't once think about where I was supposed to be instead. My son called in December. Not to argue. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said." His voice was flatter than usual, emptied out. I think I convinced myself that what we did was practical, that I was being responsible. A pause that went on long enough to mean something. I don't know if that's true anymore. I didn't rush to fill the silence. "I'd like to come visit," he said. "If that's okay." No lawyer, just me. I told him I'd think about it. I did think about it. For a week I thought about it. I thought about 38 years in a classroom. The students who came back years later to tell you something you'd said had mattered. I thought about Margaret, who had a gift for knowing the difference between the people who were trying and the people who were performing trying. I thought about what it would mean to close a door completely against my only son and what it would mean to leave it open. I called him back on a Thursday evening. "You can come," I said. "One condition. You come to hear me, not to explain. You want to say something, you listen first. Can you do that?" A long beat. "Yes," he said. "I think so. Then come in January. After the holidays." He said okay. He sounded something uncertain, maybe, or younger than he usually allowed himself to sound. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a while. Walt came through on his way to the back porch and glanced at me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I might be." He went outside. Through the kitchen window, I could see him settling into his chair, with the Warhawk finished now, lacquered, resting on a small display stand he'd made from a piece of walnut. He'd painted the nose art himself with a brush so fine it was almost invisible. 3 months. That plane had taken him. Every night. Every detail. I thought about patience. About the things worth building slowly. I got up and put the kettle on. Through the window, the yard was dark and still, and the maple had already begun. Somewhere under the soil, the long, quiet work of getting ready for spring. My son came in January, like he said he would. He sat across from me at a diner table not unlike the one where Tyler and I had eaten, and he looked like a man who had arrived somewhere uncomfortable and decided to stay anyway. He didn't make excuses. He asked questions instead. He listened to the answers. It was a beginning, not a resolution. Just a door not fully closed. On the walk back to the store afterward, I stopped at the corner where the light takes a long time and let myself stand still for a minute. 67 years old, working mornings in a hardware store, living in a room in a craftsman house with a maple tree and a man who built model planes and didn't ask too much. The inheritance was adjusted. The address was mine. The time was mine. Margaret would have had something to say about all of it. Something short and clear. The way she always did. I could almost hear it. Standing at that corner, something about stubbornness and grace. About how they were not opposites. About how the oldest lesson is always the last one you learn. The light changed. I walked. If this reached you at the right moment, if you've been waiting in a room someone else chose for you, sitting with a phone that doesn't ring, I want you to know something. You are still allowed to stand up. You are still allowed to walk out the front door. Not in anger. Not to punish anyone. Just because you know the difference between being cared for and being managed, and you are old enough, and you have always been strong enough, to trust what you know. It's never too late to choose yourself. That much I can tell you for certain.